La zuppa inglese.
Welcome back to Cucinart Academy. I am Michele De Luca, and today we are going to prepare the queen of Italian pastry.
La zuppa inglese.
Let's start right away with the ingredients. For the sponge cake, egg whites at room temperature, egg yolks, sugar, 00 flour, alchemase. For the custards, milk, vanilla bean for flavoring, rice starch, cornstarch, egg yolks, sugar, dark chocolate, chocolate drops, and cinnamon.
E cannella.
We conclude with Swiss meringue made of granulated sugar, egg whites, water, and lemon juice. Following this recipe, you will learn how to make sponge cake, a basis for lots of Italian cakes and desserts. Then, you will manage to make custards and meringues, and you will be taught how to work the vanilla bean. To prepare this delicious dish, you will need a mixer or a kneading machine.
Partiamo subito con il pan di Spagna.
We start immediately with the sponge cake. We will begin with the egg whites. That must be at room temperature. We put them inside our mixer. Our second ingredient, sugar. We're going to whip at full speed. When the meringue starts becoming fluffy and compact, we lower the speed and we go to incorporate the yolks by mixing them slightly in this fashion. And we're going to pour slowly.
A questo punto spegniamo
At this
la
point,
planetaria e
we turn off the mixer and sift the powders, then the flour,
setaccio
baking paper,
e andiamo a
sieve,
schiacciare la farina.
and we're going to sift in the flour.
Fatto questo, non ci resta che far ripartire
With
la
that done, all we have to
a
do
una
is
velocità
restart the mixer
sostenuta
at a steady
e
speed
andiamo ad incorporare
since we're
la
going to
farina
incorporate the flour inside.
La mano sinistra resta ferma.
The left
mentre
hand
la
remains
destra
steady
andiamo
while the
ad
right
incorporare
hand gives small taps in order to insert the
la
flour
farina
gradually.
gradualmente. A questo punto aumentiamo
At this
di nuovo
point, we
leggermente
lightly
la velocità.
increase the speed again.
Facciamo fare qualche
Let it
giro
stir
e
for a bit
spegniamo.
and turn it off.
Il nostro pan di
Our
Spagna
sponge cake is ready.
una vera spuma,
Real foam, very light.
non ci resta che stendere.
All we have to do is stretch it on the baking tray.
Concluso il montaggio, teglia
Once the whipping is
forno
complete,
o
we
olio
grab
silicone e andiamo
a baking tray,
ad estendere
baking paper or silicone sheet
il composto di pan
to
di
go
Spagna.
spread the sponge cake mixture.
Basta come quantità.
This amount is enough.
Parte.
We put this aside.
Servendoci di una
Using a
spatola
spatula
a
elbow, we
andiamo
level the
a
mixture.
livellare il composto. Partiamo dalla sinistra e ci
We
spostiamo
start from the left and we move slightly to the right, like this.
Andiamo a coprire tutti gli angoli.
We're going to cover all the corners. Once we spread the mixture, we bake it at 356 degrees Fahrenheit in a convection oven. While the sponge cake is baking, we start making the custards. First step, we insert the milk in a large pot and let it boil. So we put the stove at its highest setting. Okay. While the milk comes to a boil, we prepare the vanilla bean. We take a plate and lay it inside. With the non-cutting part of a knife, we first crave it in the middle and recover the pulp. We put it in the milk. We set this other part aside because we can use it for other recipes. Meanwhile, in a bowl, we are going to mix the sugar, the sifted starches, and finally cornstarch and rice starch. So, when we are making a custard, it is very important to always sift the powders to avoid lumps in cooking. Once the starches have been sifted, we are going to insert the egg yolks. We help ourselves to a spatula so as to not be wasteful. And we go to mix vigorously, starting from the center. It will form this batter of starches, sugars, and yolks. Here we go. Once we get to this consistency, in which we don't see the flour inside and on the edges anymore, we're going to insert a little bit of milk into the mixture. And we go to mix. In pastry, densities are very important. We did this because in pastry, two liquids that have the same density mix more easily. At this point, we're going to insert the mixture back into the milk and finish cooking. We're going to mix vigorously, always being careful not to burn the custard. We're going to lower the heat slightly. And we continue to stir. When the custard begins to thicken, we remove it immediately from the heat. There you go. At this point, we transfer the custard from our pot to a bowl, since it is still cooking in its own heat while in the hot pot. While the custard is still hot, we put 50% of it in the bowl with chocolate and the other 50% in an empty bowl, okay? We're going to make the chocolate custard by mixing the custard with the chocolate inside. So, at this point, using a single base, we have created two types of custards, one chocolate custard and one vanilla custard.
vediamo che il cioccolato
When we see that the chocolate is uniformly distributed in the custard, we are going to introduce the cinnamon powder.
Ovviamente con la cannella all'interno.
Obviously, the cinnamon inside completely changes the color. It becomes a beautiful copper. It also becomes more shiny and aromatic.
Andiamo a
Using the spatula, we're going to clean the entire surface of the bowl. We're going to insert the cling film on both the chocolate custard and the white custard. After completing this step, we go to place the custards in the fridge for at least 2 hours.
Ultimato questo passaggio, andiamo a
Once we have our cold custards, we go to whip the cream.
Una volta che abbiamo le nostre creme fredde,
We are going to insert the cold cream from the fridge to the mixer. We take a whisk, now we go to whip the cream. Maximum speed.
A questo punto andiamo a spegnere la
At this point,
planetaria.
we're going to turn off the mixer and we're going to check the consistency of the cream. It has to be semi-whipped. Okay, this is the correct texture. It must be very soft. It should not be that compact cream that we use for decorations, in other words.
A questo punto andiamo a dividere la panna
At this point, we're going to divide the whipped cream in the white and in the chocolate custard. Half in the white custard and the other half in the chocolate custard.
A questo punto andiamo a miscelare.
At this point, we're going to mix with a very light movement from top to bottom.
Con la panna andiamo
With the
ad
cream,
alleggerire
we're
la
going to
crema.
lighten the custard.
Diamo
We're
dell'aria,
going to give it some air so it's
spunterà
going to be frothier on the palate.
ok?
Okay?
Una volta
Once
che
the
la crema
custard
si
has
è
absorbed the
dentro la
cream,
panna, andiamo ad
we
inserire
go to
finalmente
finally
le gocce di
insert the
cioccolato.
chocolate chips.
E andiamo a miscelare.
And we go back to mixing.
Stessa cosa.
We do the same
facciamo
thing
per
for the
la
chocolate
crema
custard.
cioccolato.
We go mix
Andiamo
the
ad
cream.
amalgamare la panna. Il movimento deve essere
The movement
costante,
must be
sempre dal
constant,
basso verso
always
l'alto,
from the bottom upwards,
senza cercare
trying not
di
to
smontare la
disassemble the
massa.
mass.
Una volta terminata la crema con
Once
le
we
gocce di
finish the
cioccolato,
custard
la
with the
crema
chocolate
al
chips, the
cioccolato
chocolate
e il pan
custard,
di Spagna,
and the sponge
iniziamo
cake,
a comporre
we start
il
to
nostro
compose our
bicchiere.
glass.
Prendiamo un sacco a poche.
We take a pastry bag and we go to fill it with chocolate custard. That's it. Let's put this aside. Our first layer will be the chocolate custard.
Tagliamo leggermente
We're going to cut the tip of the pastry bag slightly,
e andiamo
and we go to
ad
insert
inserire
a small amount on the bottom.
sul fondo, in questo modo qui. Fatto
With
questo,
that
passiamo
done,
al pan
we
di
move
Spagna.
on to the sponge
Togliamo
cake.
la carta da forno che
We
abbiamo
remove the
utilizzato
baking
durante
paper
la
that we
cottura.
use during baking. we take a 0.8-inch pastry cutter, going to cut out the sponge cake. Going to soak it in the Alchemy's liquor and place it on top of the chocolate custard. After this, we are going to insert the custard with chocolate chips. We take a second pastry bag and go to fill it with custard. That's it. We set it aside. I'm going to cut off the tip, and we're going to insert the custard with chocolate chips on the sponge cake. At this point, we take the pastry cutter with a diameter of 2 inches, because we're going to cover it with more sponge cake. We dip the sponge cake in Alchemy's. Look at the consistency. It's like a sponge. It manages to absorb the liquid well. We place it in the glass. Okay, let's go again with chocolate custard, like this. Let's repeat again with sponge cake, again with the 2-inch pastry cutter. Let's go dipping again in the liquor. Now we make a slight pressure in order to eliminate any air pockets inside. Having arrived at this point, we finish with the ultimate decoration, the Swiss meringue. Let's take a high casserole. Let's introduce first the egg white, the granulated sugar, and finally the water. Let's bring the mixture to a temperature of 149 degrees Fahrenheit. Obviously, since it is egg white, we use a very low heat. At this point, we mix everything. I repeat, the temperature must be low, otherwise we burn the egg white. We bring the mixture to a temperature of 149 degrees Fahrenheit. In this way, we pasteurize the egg white and facilitate the assembly phase. We increase the temperature slightly at this stage, and we have to keep mixing. When the sugar begins to melt, we use a thermometer to check when the mixture reaches 149 degrees Fahrenheit. I do not recommend exceeding this temperature, otherwise the egg white will begin to coagulate. After reaching this point, we'll immediately insert the whisk and whip at maximum speed.
Andiamo subito a montare, inseriamo la frusta e andiamo a montare a velocità massima.
Then, finally, we turn off our mixer. This is the final result. This is the perfect meringue. It must form this curve and must absolutely not drip, staying very frothy and firm. We go to remove the whisk. We take a pastry bag with the nozzle size 6, and we go to insert the meringue inside. Perfect texture, shiny.
A questo punto andiamo a formare
Now we go to form
i
our
nostri
spikes.
spuntoni.
We start from the outside.
Partiamo dall'esterno.
We're
Andiamo
going to slightly
leggermente
press
a
and
pressare
pull up
e
like
tiriamo
this.
su in questo modo. Facciamo lo stesso.
We do the same for all of them.
E terminiamo
And we
al
finish in the middle.
A questo punto
At this
andiamo
point,
a
we're going to
flambe
flambe the meringue. Let's get a torch.
Fiamma bassa.
Low flame.
E andiamo
We're going to burn them
leggermente
lightly,
a bruciacchiare.
like so.
Questo modo qua.
We
Partiamo
first
da
keep our
lontano,
distance, okay?
Non ci avviciniamo
We don't get very
tantissimo,
close,
altrimenti andiamo
otherwise
a
we'll burn the
bruciare la
meringue.
Una volta flambata,
Once
la
flambéed,
facciamo
we let it cool
leggermente
slightly
raffreddare
and
e
finish with
completiamo
chocolate
con delle
decorations.
decorazioni in cioccolato. Ne mettiamo un'altra
We put
qui.
another one here.
Arrivati a questo
At this
punto,
point,
la nostra
our zuppa
inglese
inglese
è pronta
is ready
da
to be
essere
tasted.
degustata.
I suggest a sweet white wine to accompany this dessert.